So, welcome to Open Local Wine Event. To give you a little bit of an introduction on how we decided to take part in this event, I'll give you a bit of background. For those who don't know me, I am Stephanie Pichet. I have been living in this food and wine world for, oh God, at least 20 years now. But I finally decided to take the plunge and open my own wine bar here in Northern Ontario because it was definitely lacking. And we managed to finally get open January 4th, 2020. So you can imagine what our first year in business has been like. But luckily, I've had experience in audio video editing, doing some public speaking, teaching classes, so that the quick pivot into a virtual format was not that complicated for us, luckily. So we are going to celebrate and taste 5 different wines from Ontario, because this whole event is all about supporting and celebrating the wines that we produce locally here, just to sort of maybe wipe away any misconceptions about Ontario wines, or reintroduce you to ones that maybe you're not that familiar with or you haven't had in a while, and also to show support to the wine growers, the workers that are in those fields, the people who work in the tasting rooms and in the marketing and back end side of the business, just to show them that, yes, we're still here for you. And when we come back, we'll be out to visit you and go to your tasting rooms and support you locally when we can. But so for this time, at least we can do so is just by getting some wines here from our LCBO. Now, you're probably wondering, if you are a local wine aficionado, why I only chose wines from Niagara. There was 2 reasons for that. One, it was just easier on my part, because there might be people who are watching this who are not here in Sudbury, and I needed to choose wines that are available at most LCBOs throughout Ontario. And that means if you are in a tiny little town of 500 to a big metropolis, you should be able to find these without having to drive 2 hours. So that was one. And because Niagara and area have so many different wineries that regularly stock LCBOs, it was easier to choose those ones. Second of all, they're actually great wines, which is good fun. And by coincidence, Alex mentioned to me yesterday, he ended up buying a kit. So I don't know whether Alex is actually going to be joining us on this call or not, which is fine. But he pointed out that on our last trip that we did through Ontario to go and do a little wine buying trip last year, these are wineries we didn't go to. So we've made a note, and we are going to go and visit these people in person as soon as we get out of this lockdown. We tentatively have traveling scheduled to go and do our little wine buying trip in May. So that's our plan for that. So probably late 3rd week of May, somewhere around there. So now all of these wineries are going to be on there, but he was so curious, he decided to get himself so that he can learn about these wines. Now, I included in the email that you received the wine map for the Niagara and escarpment area, as well as the wine map for Niagara-On-The-Lake. If you're watching this in the YouTube video, it's actually, if you scroll below the YouTube video, you'll find the links there as well. But these kind of give you an idea of all the different wineries that are in these 2 areas. If I have a chance this afternoon, because I don't want to delay the upload of the video, I'll also include a couple of other wine maps for other regions that are not represented here in this tasting today, such as Prince Edward County. I'm also looking at other new areas that are just starting to crop up. We really like to support some of the ones even closer to us. So Collingwood area surprisingly has a lot of great wineries that are up and coming. Some of them have been there for a long time, like Georgian Hills Winery. And then, of course, for those of you who have come to the classes before and just before lockdown, I was really giving them a shout out, and we have a special tasting coming up just for them, and it's Kin Vineyards, and they are in the Carp Ridge, Canada area of Ottawa, and they specialize in Burgundy style Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs. So I'm very excited to be kind of working with them on showing other areas of Ontario some love when it comes to winemaking. Basically, if you can farm vegetables and some fruit, you can pretty much probably grow grapes. It just depends on what type of grape and what type of soil and where you're located. So that's one of the things that we're really lucky here in Ontario, is that we have this really great terroir. And if you haven't learned that word yet, That is the magic word that winemakers like to use. And it's basically just a French terminology for everything that encompasses or has an effect on that grape when it's growing. So that means the soil, the wind, if there's ocean air nearby, if the temperature is considered, or the climate is, they call it continental, but basically meaning it's hot in summer and cool in winter. There's all kinds of things that affect, besides just the soil, on how that grape is going to grow. And for any of you who have a green thumb, not this girl, you will note that it's exactly the same way when you're growing anything, is that, you know, tomatoes do well with heat, and everyone knows you plant certain things in certain places and certain kind of soils, and sometimes you have to add things to the soil to make your final product better. And it's the same thing happening with grapes. And then the artistic side of things, after the grapes are harvested, this is where the winemaker really comes into play, because it's the winemaker's touch, it's their palate and everything else that actually create that next, could be 6 to 12 to 18 months of the winemaking process before it actually gets to you, and then before I get to go and either serve it here in the bar, or it goes in your little bottles if you got the tasting kit. So for those of you who did have the tasting kits, just a little bit of sort of an introduction. No, I don't usually include cheese things for you. This was just a little bonus to do for this particular event. I don't like to do a lot of cheese boards and things here, as much as wine and cheese seems like an easy out or an easy menu pairing option. And it's partly because we also have friends around the corner, the Fromagerie, who specialize in cheese boards. And we wanted to show that there's other things that also pair well with wine. So we do have a lot of cheese laden things, don't get me wrong, but the actual just standard cheese boards, we save those for corporate and virtual events similar to what we're doing today. So we're going to go through 5 wines. You should, if you also include the tasting notes, which is the list of the wines, the order that we're tasting them, that's also included below in the details section of the YouTube video, or it was emailed to you prior if you registered online. Either way, you should have those. You don't necessarily have to refer to them, because it's kind of boring if you just want to read alcohol contents and sugar contents. Not really fun unless you're really into the numbers thing. But I'll just sort of tell you a little bit of stories, show you how to taste the wines, what to look for. If you have one of the cheese boards or the snacks in front of you, I'll kind of give you a hint on what kind of things would go well with this. If you are lucky enough to have a chance to get to the LCBO and buy the full bottles of the wines that are included with this class, then you probably have 5 wines to enjoy over the weekend. So I'll give you some ideas of some menu items that you can either make for dinner tonight or for tomorrow, just to sort of get the best out of the rest of those bottles. I also have part bottles here because these are the ones that kind of made those little tasting kits. So no, I am not finishing them all. So if you haven't been here before, we have this little device. You'll be seeing me using it today. It's like my little sidekick on all of our new tasting kit videos. It shows up quite a bit. So it looks like a little spaceship, but it's called Coravin. It is a wine preservation system, and we use it religiously here in the bar. I use it, I've always had one at home. Even the home one's kind of made its way here because we need it so often, but it just allows us to pull wine from the bottle without removing the cork. And we now have these new cool little devices as well for screw cap wines, which you see I'm using on this first one, and it shows up again here on the Pinot. But it's this little device that replaces the screw cap right off the bat that seals in the air as it is and allows no additional oxygen to come in. And it's got a special top on there that I can put the needle in and still pull the wine just like if it was a cork. So it's kind of like a pretend cork that's on there, but it's kind of handy. So I use this so that if somebody decided to message me later this afternoon for some reason and ask me for one of the kits for today, I should be able to do it because I still have wine and it's still fresh. And no, I'm not drinking it all. So you should have all the wines in the order that I've given them to you in your kit. So we're going to start with the Riesling first. Try not to pour too much. It is 1 o'clock in the afternoon all. And I eventually have to get home. I'm not spending the day here at the bar. Today is probably the nice day that we're going to have for the next week. So if you're up and to be outside, even better, enjoying this, which is great. So before I talk about the wine, we're going to go through the regular tasting process. So hopefully you didn't pour too much in your glass, or you're not using so small of a glass that your full 2 ounces that I gave you if you have the tasting kits is not completely filling up the glass. So This is our classic tasting glass that we normally do. So the 2-ounce pour usually comes about halfway so that you can still have a chance to swirl if you need to, but at least it's not going to overflow and make too much of a mess. Once you get in the hang of always putting smaller amounts of wine in your glass, it's very difficult to go back to the full glass. You can still have the same amount of wine, but if you pour a little at a time, it allows it to breathe a little bit, allows you to get more of the aromas. It's just a good practice to get into, is just doing a little at a time as you're going through. Okay, so we're going to go through the full process so that you can learn how to use all of your senses to enjoy a glass of wine. After a while, you will notice that you're starting to do this out of habit if you do it every time that you open a new bottle or you're trying something new. If you're out at a restaurant, when we get to go back to in-person dining, you'll do the same thing when you order a glass, that you'll be able to do the same process. It also helps you to kind of get a full idea of what the wine tastes like, especially if you're choosing the wine and then deciding what to eat with it. So we'll get that in a second. So first things first, I'm looking for something white here. So if you have a piece of paper, the tasting kits, you probably had your little half sheet that was in there, or a paper towel or anything white. This allows you to get the true color of the wine, depending on what room you're in. If you're near sunshine or not, you could be holed up in some place away from your kids, which I've heard is happening often nowadays. And like a lot of people are in their basements, which is great. That's a great hiding spot, by the way. It's nice and cool when it's too warm outside. But having something white automatically gives brightness to it, and it allows you to block out any of that ambient color in the room so that you get the true color of the wine. So if you put something white against the glass, and it's kind of hard to see with my lighting here, because again, I got a lot of sun coming in those windows, even with my curtains closed. But by doing this, you actually get a truer picture of what that color is. So this is a very pale straw color. You'll hear winemakers use that a lot when they're describing color. They, especially white wines, they like to call them straw colored, as opposed to, and then when it gets really yellow, they call it golden. But at least straw gives you an idea. So this is like dry hay color. It doesn't sound as pretty as straw, but dry hay. Okay, so now that you looked at the color, you're also looking for clarity. That's not necessarily whether it's bad or not bad or good, but clarity just gives you an idea of what the mouthfeel is going to be like. If it was foggy or has sediment in it, you know that, oh, I'm going to actually feel that probably when I taste it. You're also looking for this colorless rim where the color of the wine and the inside of the glass meet. It almost looks like a little gray rim around that. That's called the meniscus. For those of you who still remember high school chemistry, that's just a terminology talking about that little ring. It is just something to do with the liquid and the molecules. As white wine ages, that little ring actually is going to get smaller. It's just a sort of a fun thing, helps you decide or helps you get an idea on the age of the wine. Now, it's time to have a little sniff. So the first time we're going to do it, we're not going to play around with the glass too much and just put your nose in as is. So again, hopefully your glass is not too full, or this could be wet. So right away, without even adding additional oxygen or doing anything else, you're already getting fruit and citrus. First thing, touch of floral. You can name the aromas that you're picking out however you want. Everyone describes aromas differently. Is one of the few senses that you developed as you age. So when you were a kid, you didn't know what a rose smelled like until you smelled that aroma and someone told you, oh, that's a rose, or you recognized it by sight. Other than that, if you had never seen or smelled a rose before and someone gave you that aroma out of a little vial or a jar or something, you would have no idea what it was. So it's something that you teach yourself as you're growing older. You start to identify aromas and then it sinks in. You create memories that attach to those aromas, and that's kind of how it works. Now, so the second thing we're going to do is now we're going to add some oxygen just by swirling the glass. So if you are proficient and drink wine as much as me, this is easy. If you find it a little tricky and you're worried you're going to spill, you can always put it on a table, bar top, or something in front of you and do exactly the same thing. And just before it settles, put your nose back in. So this still smells like it's going to be light because it's not in my face strong smelling. I'm still getting the similar aromas that I did that first time. Maybe you've got a better sniffer than I do, and you maybe have picked out new aromas that you didn't get the first time. So I'm still getting that I always get a Riesling always reminds me of apple. That's just me. I can pick out an apple aroma in there, like a just like a almost like a tart green apple. And then I'm still getting a little bit of this citrus, like a lemon peel almost. And then it's like a soft floral, but not one of those, not quite chamomile. Again, not a green thumb, so naming flowers is not my thing, but I still get it. Smell, it's pretty, right? Okay, so now we're gonna do 2 sips. The first one is basically gonna cleanse your palate. If you are already nibbling on the stuff in front of you, this is gonna help erase it. You should have some water nearby. If water is also a great palate cleanser, but this just speeds up the process of cleansing your palate so that you're getting the truest taste of the wine that you deserve. All right, so first one in. Let it coat your mouth. It's much richer than thought, right? When you first smell that, you're thinking, oh, it's going to be soft and pretty. And it is, but there's so much more flavor going on in this glass than it was originally, right? Okay, so now you let that coat. Also take a note of how long it's lasting on your palate. So even after I've been babbling for these last few seconds, you're probably still tasting it, right? That's called a long finish. That is great indication of a food pairing wine. If this disappeared within a second after you sipped it, you wouldn't even have a chance to put a fork of anything in your mouth because you wouldn't be able to get that wine and food pairing experience because the wine flavor would be gone. So that's a good thing to look for. So let's do one more. Now you're getting the richness, right? It's not quite its oily thing, but it's got this great balance. Acidity makes your mouth water. So already just by saying that and talking about the fruit flavors, my mouth's already starting to water a little bit, which is why one of the Rieslings, winemakers all over the world, if they could say there was a wine grape that they wish more people would drink more often, it's always going to say, they're going to say Riesling. It does grow well and it can be controlled in warmer climates, but it does its best in cool climates. And we have more space and places to play and grow things with cooler climates. So it tends to grow at a lot of different places all over the world. But because it's got this nice balance of fruit flavor and acidity, the acidity does really well when it comes to food. So for food pairing, it's phenomenal. Okay, so I had a little notes here of what the cheeses I gave you because those of you had the cheese thing in front of you didn't want to not mention one that's there. I always like to try or suggest trying a Riesling with goat cheese. So I always put a goat cheese or a classic Chev in my tasting boxes because I find that goat cheese, there are even the people who don't like goat cheese. That's a big shout out to my son who's not a big goat cheese fan, but goat cheese with wine is a whole different experience. So the fruitiness naturally that occurs in a Riesling is a great foil for things like the tanginess of a goat cheese is really great with that, especially if this was fruitier, but also anything salty. So if you have salty something or other in front of you, it can be a salty cheese, but I'm suggesting also like salted nuts, or if you're having potato chips, like anything salty does really well with a classic Riesling like this. So this one's made by Vineland Estates. It is on the Niagara Escarpment. These particular vines that grew this Riesling are almost 40 years old. They were actually brought here from Germany, as many of the Riesling plants do in the Niagara area. Konzelman's another one who also started with grapevines brought in from Germany. There's quite a few of them that have been around in that area for that long. And that's one of the great things. People don't realize the history that's evolved from that. So there's a lot of German immigrants that came here, and they may have been the second or third generation of winemakers in Germany, whether it's the Mosel area or closer to Alsace in France on that side. But they always love, Riesling is probably one of the best food pairing wines, as I mentioned, and they are looking for similar types of soil and climate that they would have in Germany. And for some reason, the Niagara between the soils and the cool breezes they're getting in from the Great Lakes, it actually makes such a huge difference. And it's very similar to what they would have in Germany. So it was an easy find for them to be able to plant these grapes. And obviously they're doing well if it's been there for almost 40 years. So older grape, the roots have a chance to kind of take hold in the soil. They're sturdier, they can handle cooler climates. If you happen to have a cold snap one year, you're not so worried about them. Older vines tend to do that. So if you're looking around for, or if you see something talking about old vines on a label, whether it's here in Ontario or if you're shopping through other areas of the LCBO, don't forget to look for things like old vines. That just means that they're probably going to be a little bit more consistent because they've had a chance to sort of plant roots, so they say, and that allows them to sort of thrive better in different kinds of weather conditions. So hopefully you're enjoying this first one. Again, it's a great palate cleanser. I always like starting with the Riesling, especially here in Ontario. We grow so much of it that almost every winery and tasting room that you go to, especially here in Ontario, you'll find that everybody's got a Riesling. And it's just because it's just, it's yummy. It's good stuff. Now that's the reason I don't pour so much, because I'm trying to use one glass. And if I poured like 3 ounces of every single one, we would never get this show in the room. Okay, so I'm going to move this to the next one. So I did mention, if you weren't, you messaged or you were joining us earlier or a little bit later, I was talking about why I didn't include all the other ones, the wines from the different regions. And it's only because of availability. I really wanted to make sure that if anyone in Ontario was joining us for this class, that you could easily find these at the LCBO. So a lot of these are from the vintages section, but even the smaller stores can carry it. So they're, especially Ontario wines, I even find that the tiniest little LCBO outlet, sometimes they're like an old trailer that's been converted or something in some of these places, they still tend to have a really great selection of Ontario wines. So it's just a matter of knowing what to look for. And that's what we're doing here today. Okay. So the next one we're going to do is the Chardonnay. Now, we're going to a slightly different area. We're in the Niagara Escarpment. This is still considered part of the escarpment, but it's like a sub-region, and this is Beamsville Bench. So this winery is called Hidden Bench. Now, Beamsville has its own group of wineries in that little area. It's like a little cluster. So if you're looking at that map of the Niagara Escarpment, you'll see there's a big cluster of them together. When it's time to go back and go down on little road trips and spend a weekend and go visit wine country, I really suggest the Bench area, only because there's a lot of great wines. I think Angels Gate's down there. I'm trying to think, I think Featherstone might be there. Can't remember them all offhand, but there's a group of them, including Hidden Bench. Anything that has the word bench in it. 30 Bench is another one. But they're all in this area and they're so close together, you can almost walk from one to the other. And they have this fantastic spring, they always have it late spring event called Graze the Bench. And Norm and I have gone a number of years in a row to the point that we've got to the point now we have a plan of how we're going to attack and get to all of them. And I've been trying to figure out a way to do something similar here in Sudbury, but we're so spread out here, it's kind of difficult. Even our great food and wine places are all fairly spread out, so it's kind of hard to do this hop on, hop off thing. But it's basically like a hop on, hop off bus that takes you to, I don't know, I forget how many wineries. I think there was 11 or 12 different wineries that usually participate every year, and they're all within the bench area. And they all have an appetizer or two that go with a couple of the wines that they're featuring. And you get tickets, just like a Midway, you get so many tickets to start, and then you can just buy sample tickets as you go. But they have live bands at every single winery. If you decide to buy bottles or anything while you're at these wineries, you can actually check, like a coat check, you can bag check on the bus, the shuttle bus. So they just put a tag on it with your name and leave it at the main parking lot before you leave. So you can just shop with your heart content and keep tasting as you're going. But then at the end of it, all you have to do is basically transfer everything into your cab, obviously, since you're going to be having to worry about that. But at least you're not like carting around all these bags, and that you can support the wineries when you're there. Anyway, it's a phenomenal idea. It is so well run and it's a lot of fun. And it's obviously, we're not going to get to it this year, but make a note for 2022. When they do, if you can find the website for Graze the Bench, if you're interested in something like this, you need to book your tickets, or at least put in your calendar for the day the tickets are going to go on sale, because it's usually for the full day on the Saturday or the tickets for a Sunday ticket. I've only been able to get tickets for a Saturday once, because by the time I even see a Twitter post or something saying that the tickets are available, I automatically get a notification saying that they're sold out. That's how fast it goes for the Saturday. And then I managed to get on a Sunday, but then all of a sudden now you're having to worry about, okay, trying to find things on Sunday night. And anyways, it's easier on a Saturday, but that's why they sell it so quickly. But anyways, it's that popular. So you got to do that. That's my little shout out to Beamsville. Okay. And you'll notice I'm not rinsing my glass in between. It's not really necessary as long as you're going in from one wine to the other. If we were hopping between whites and reds, I would either say switch your glass or rinse it out. You can either rinse it out with water, or just like you rinsed your palette, you can rinse it with wine, but you don't have probably a lot of it, so don't do that. It's wasting. But when you go to these big wine tasting conventions and things that I have, there's a lot of places that will actually rinse my glass with their own wine before they give me the sample. It's like crazy, right? And they're dumping it. Anyways. Enough of my venting. All right, so now that you went through the whole tasting process, we're going to do exactly the same thing all over again. Let's do a little faster this time. We're going to look at something white. Definitely more color in this wine than the Riesling. Pale golden color, I would say, if you're using proper terminology. Definitely clear. I can see a little bit of it's clinging to the glass. Those streaks that you see running down your glass, those are called the legs. That's usually an indication of how much alcohol is in the wine. So the thicker and slower those little streaks go on your glass, the more fun you're gonna have. Okay, so we're gonna take 2 sniffs. First one in without playing around with it too much. Definitely different aromas. I'm getting more oak right off the bat with this because my nose picks up oak very quickly, but it's like a toasty note to it. Okay, so give it a swirl on the tabletop or in the air, doesn't matter. And then nose in. Definitely a little bit more intense, right? But I still get, so I guess you get that buttery, you get the toastiness, a touch of spice, but you're still getting the fruit aromas that are in there. So I always get almost like white stone fruit, like white peaches are a big one. I still get a hint of citrus to it because there's still a little bit of acidity, but those are just the first things that pop in my nose when I smell this. But definitely I can smell the oak right off the bat. Sometimes you can almost get a hint of vanilla, but not this one. It's more toast. And if you like bread and yeast and stuff, it's toast. Okay, first sip. Now, it smelled like it was going to be a little bit that spicy toastiness. You probably maybe weren't or ready to get this kind of creaminess to it, right? Remember, it's 2 sips, but it's pleasantly balanced. Based on the nose, I was expecting like this big oaky, in your face kind of a California style Chardonnay, but it's much more subtle than you may have expected if you didn't do that process, right? By giving it a nose, you're kind of expecting one thing, and then it's a surprise that you're either reaffirming what you thought it was going to be, or it's complete surprise because the flavor doesn't always match. Having 3. Because I gotta go on to the next one. Good stuff. So Hidden Bench is renowned for their certified organic vineyards, meaning that they're not putting any additional stuff in their soil, and they're very, very proud of that. There's big explanations all over their website if you want to read up more on it. They even do some biodynamic practices at the winery, which means that some of their wines, besides just doing organic, when you see biodynamic, that just basically means they're taking it one step further, where they are planting and harvesting based on lunar cycles, a little bit of astrological considerations in their process. They also try to do everything completely natural, meaning don't even add yeast to the wine to create more alcohol, and they try to do it as natural as possible. When they do have to add yeast to particular ones like this, they try to use natural indigenous yeast that is already located where they are, so that it's the most natural and nod to the local terroir that is in the bench area. So they're very mindful on how they're doing that. They're also really well known for their sustainability. They're trying not to reducing waste. They try to do things by hand, not using so much machinery. They do a lot of what they call green harvesting, which kind of just encourages, they do it by hand, where just when the grapes are getting to a certain stage of growth, they'll actually go in and pick out still things that are still green underneath, which just encourages more growth and encourages more ripeness and all the nutrients to go to the grapes that remain. So that happens quite a bit. But that's just part of the natural process to basically get the grapes to their fullest. And winemakers have been doing this for centuries, but Hidden Bench has been doing this. They've been around for almost, actually, they're fairly new. I want to say 2003. 2003 is like it was like yesterday, so it's getting close to 20 years. But because they started off with these practices, that was their whole idea when they were started growing in this area, and they've been continuing to do so. So if organic wines are really important to you, or if you're interested in biodynamic processes, or you like the idea that they are trying to be very environmentally friendly, then Hidden Bench is probably going to be one of your go-tos. Yes, they do really great Chardonnays, but they're also known for some of their reds. They're kind of picking things that are actually will do really well in their area with very little intervention from winemakers or farmers to kind of let the grapes sort of speak for themselves. So one of the reasons that this is kind of buttery in flavor, it has to do with malolactic fermentation. Basically just talking about how a natural occurring bacteria will actually change. This is going to get nerdy again. Change from the malic acid to a lactic acid. Lactic acid is the same thing that you would get in milk, right? That's what makes milk creamy type of acidity. So that's that slightly buttery feel that you get when you drink a Chardonnay that's had that natural occurring process happen to it. So you're asking me, well, Steph, what am I going to have with this? So the Riesling, I told you that, yes, it's great with goat cheese and anything that's salty. So that's just a natural thing. If you were looking for food type things, again, look for things like seafood does really well with it, especially things like sushi. Asian cuisine can do really well with a Riesling just because it's got enough flavor to it to pair with like the fresh fish and the soy sauce, right? If it's got enough fruit forwardness, it can handle things like wasabi and spicier stuff, or your spicy tuna rolls. So Riesling's usually a really great match for, especially if you're going out for sushi someplace and you're not into sake. The other thing, so then Chardonnay, on the other hand, this is because it's more buttery. It's got some toasty notes. If you can really pick up that toasty aromas and flavor in it, anything that's toasted or has that also aroma will just enhance it. So think pastry, think grilled anything. So grilled marks, things that are toasted, things that are crunchy, crostini type things, a toasted sandwich of some sort, toasted chicken sandwich. And then the creaminess comes with anything creamy. So in your cheese thing in front of you, your brie is going to be a great one for this. The fontina is really great with this. It'll just enhance the creaminess. And then the natural acidity that's still in the wine will still sort of stand up and kind of cut through all of that creaminess. So I always try to tell people that they're always asking me, it's like, well, okay, Chardonnay, I never know what to pair with it. My number one favorite pairing for Chardonnay, especially one that's got a touch of oak to it, is a chicken pot pie. So I think the creaminess, chicken, which is not too strong tasting. Yes, you can put some vegetables in it, but they're never anything that's overly harsh. As long as you're not throwing things like asparagus and artichokes and weird stuff in it. And then just that puff pastry top that's already buttery and toasty. Yeah, puff chicken pot pie. That's your wine for that. So now you're thinking, oh my God, what am I going to have for dinner now? For all that. Okay. But yes, grilled stuff. So a grilled chicken Caesar salad would do well with this kind of Chardonnay. Trying to think what else. You can do grilled pork, nothing that's overly too spiced and too seasoned. Like toasted spices would be good, but within reason. But yeah, things in the like grilled vegetables on the barbecue is just spectacular with it. One of my favorite salads is to do like just grilled vegetables, and while they're still warm, like mushrooms and things, put that on a salad, and then maybe a couple shrimp and things like that. Just very simple with an oil and vinegar. I'm very simple that way. And I let the wine do the rest of the flavor, right? That's the way it works. Okay, now we're going to go into rosé. Now, if anyone who knows me and has come to this far knows that I am adamant on people should drink more rosé, especially this time of year. Especially when most people tend to show up at my bar at that 5 o'clock time. I always say 5 o'clock's rosé time. I tend to drink with the sun. Somebody taught me that on one of our trips while we were traveling. I know it was in Europe. I can't remember specifically where, but it was a formula that's worked for me ever since. I do not get hangovers from wine, considering how often I'm tasting it. You would think that hangovers would be part of my life, but it doesn't. First of all, I may taste a lot, but I don't drink a lot. You'll never see me polishing off 2, 3 bottles a night. I could not even fathom the idea, but especially not at this age. But I really enjoy the idea of playing it with the sun. So when the sun's at its highest and sparkliest, just think light and sparkling. So that's your Prosecco and champagne and or cava or whatever else, very, very light whites. As the sun gets into that really hot time around 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that's European lunchtime. That's where you can get into a little bit heavier whites. So you get your full-bodied Rieslings, full-bodied Chardonnays. As the afternoon goes on, the sun just before, it starts to get a little bit lower, but it's still kind of bright. Rosé, so I told you, it's the after work time. You do the rosés because the sky's starting to turn a little pink. And then as the sun starts to set and it becomes more of this orangey, light red color, that's where you get into your lighter reds. And then later in the evening, around campfires or whatever else, the later in the night, the darker the reds can get. And then you can get into ports and all that kind of fun stuff. But if you follow that, it also has to do with the amount of alcohol in the wines. Usually those bigger, richer reds are higher in alcohol and higher in sugar naturally. And if you tried to have that at 12:30 with lunch, you won't make it until 6 o'clock. If my husband's around, you can ask him. He's learned his lesson by trying to drink Amarone for lunch. But again, that's the Italian class. All right, grab your rosé all day. I used to have a t-shirt and I can't find it anymore. Okay, so this is, gosh, it's tight. 3 of Hearts Rosé. So this is actually produced by Henry of Pelham. So Henry of Pelham is a really big, well-known winery in the Niagara area. It is 3 of Hearts is just their, it's kind of like a separate line. Henry of Pelham is really well known for, if you ever go to their website, it is run by the Speck brothers. I can't remember their names. I think it's Paul, Dan, I can't remember the other brother's name, but there's 3 brothers. When their father passed away, who started Henry of Pelham, much as they kind of worked in the fields when they were kids, they all kind of went away. Oh yeah, they all went and got philosophy degrees. Which I thought was the weirdest fact I ever heard about the Speck brothers. Yeah, so they're all philosophers. And then they end up coming back and they took over the winery and they've been there ever since. But all of their different spin-off lines, besides the classic Henry of Pelham label, they all have either a story or meaning behind them, but there's a number of different labels, but they're still produced by Henry of Pelham, and this is one of them. So they produce a classic rosé like this, but they also make a Pinot Gris as well. So you can get a 3 of Hearts Pinot Grigio as well for all my Pinot Grigio fans out there. I never knock Pinot Grigio anymore because there's too many people in Sudbury that love it, right? So this is a blend of mostly Pinot Noir, and as you can see, there's barely any color in there. And then they put a hint of Pinot Gris in it as well for some balance. They tried not to have any color to it from the Pinot Gris, but people don't realize that Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio, which is the same grape, it's actually almost could be a shade of pink to it. So by putting the skin contact with the Pinot Gris and then not using any skin from the Pinot Noir, you almost naturally get this color anyways. There's actually some, I don't know if we still have one here somewhere, but I do have a couple of Pinot Grigios that, especially I find a couple of them that are in Italy, and they are closer to this color naturally. You don't really have to do anything with it, which is great. And the other reason is because it's a white wine grape that is, if they use skin contact on that, technically it's an orange wine. But again, that's a different class. But it's the same idea, taking a white wine grape and then letting it have skin contact to it for maceration, and then you get this other color. So I said, so this is mostly Pinot Noir. This maceration type of rosé production is the most commonly used one that creates a dry style using a red wine grape. There are 2 other methods of rosé making. I don't have to go into a long detail of it, but there is what they call a saigné method, which just means bleeding. And it just means that's a way they pull out juice out of the red wine production to make the red wine stronger. And what comes left over that they pull out is what they sell as a saigné method rosé. And then the third one is just a classic blush. Those are the style that you find down in California that have been around since the 70s. It's kind of like a splash of red in the white. They bottle it cheap. And that's the usual style. Sometimes you'll find whites and Findels kind of like that, where it's made to be sweeter. But again, that's rosé class. So you're saying, Steph, enough chatting. It's time to drink. You know the routine. Grab something white. I want you to take a better look at that pretty pale color. This is interesting because a lot of Provençal style rosés, depending on the grape that they're using, they're more of a salmon color. This is actually pink. Sometimes it's almost a rose gold, but this is definitely like a very pale blush pink, which is interesting. So you're thinking, I wonder what this is going to taste like. So 2 sniffs first. Okay, so I'm getting so Pinot Noir actually has this natural flavors to it, but as soon as you add some oxygen and put your nose in again. So you're definitely getting red fruit, but faintly. It's not crazy. I'm definitely getting some herbal stuff in here, which is interesting. All right, 2 sips. Juicy, which is nice. I get a touch of strawberry, but almost that underripe strawberry. But it's very delicate, which is nice. Rosé is my go-to, and I love the acidity in this. Rosé is my go-to when you can't decide between white or red. So late lunch, appetizers, bunch of people around, trying to find one wine that's going to go with what everybody else is snacking on. This kind of style is your wine. So it's going to be light and refreshing. Again, it's that late afternoon thing. Most rosés are not sweet. You got to say it with me. Most rosés are not sweet. So when the LCBO lists and has that wall of pink when you come into the larger centers, and you see all those different colors, just because there's darker colors in there doesn't necessarily mean that that's a sweetness level. Usually those colors just mean it's a different grape that they're using, or the winemaker left the skins in long enough to give it a darker color before they remove them. That's all the color usually means. So you can't judge it based on that. I usually tell people if they want to try a rosé made with the same grape they already like. If you are a Pinot Noir fan, Pinot Noir rosés are going to be your jam. So Niagara, not just Niagara, Prince Edward County, a lot of the rosés that are produced here in Ontario, because Pinot Noir grows so well here in a cool climate, you'll find a lot of really great Pinot Noir rosés. And that's probably one of the style of rosés that we sell the most here at Wander. And it's just because it is light and it's juicy and it's still dry. It is also one of the grapes that's used in the production of Provençal style, which is from the south of France. That's where you get that pretty salmon color. But because they use the Pinot Gris as a little bit of a splash in this with the skin contact, that's why you're getting the more truer, pinker color as opposed to the salmon. And it's good. Now, for in front of you, you'll notice for those who had the cheese platters or the cheese boxes, I gave you a little bit of drunken apple jelly. I forgot to mention that's also from a winery from Harbor Estates in Niagara. So they actually produce that. So I only have a jar or 2 left, but I thought it would be fun to actually put a Niagara-made jelly in there instead of just my own. And then the other thing you have in there is basil pesto. So basil pesto is one of those things that everybody kind of either has or makes, but it's kind of simple. It goes with savory things. It can go with most cheeses. And something that's complex and still dry and juicy like this can really balance out the flavors of basil pesto. So whether you're using pesto and a little bit of oil and you're putting it in a pasta salad, if you are drizzling it just on a part of a salad dressing, or if you're just brushing chicken or salmon or something with it on the barbecue, basil pesto is a pretty easy match for something like this. So then I would also look at most of the cheeses that are on your cheese thing that I gave you, all the way from Gruyere to whatever would actually do okay with this. This is the only one that I would say, because it's so dry, if you were making your own cheese platter to go with this, I would just stay away from any really heavy blue cheeses. The only one that I would suggest that would do well with that would be that there's like a Brest blue, it's called, or it's almost like a brie with a blue veining in it. So it's that combination, it's closer to a brie, but it's still got the salty and pungentness of a blue cheese. So something like that would be really great. There's a lot of those that are out in the grocery stores right now, because it's either a love-hate thing with blue cheese. But one of my favorite memories when it comes to having a rosé this style is in, I'd say, the south of France, Morocco. I think it was, I don't even know, not Morocco, Monaco. So I was in Monaco when I had this, but it was just a very light style rosé, and I had, just because I said blue cheese, that's what made me think of it. mussels with the blue cheese cream sauce and fries to dip in the sauce. And so, of course, when I opened this bar, that was one of the first times I had mussels, and I was determined to have it here. And all of my friends who came in and said that they hate blue cheese all left loving blue cheese because they just never had it in a cream sauce like that before. And I even tell people now that if you're making a homemade mac and cheese and you're making a cheese sauce, just throw in a couple of crumbles of blue cheese, and even your kids won't know it, but the flavor is so much more pronounced and a little bit saltier and more flavorful that it just takes your mac and cheese to whole other level. But again, that's another class. Okay, so now we're getting ready to go into the reds. Flat Rock Cellars, another one from Niagara. Now, again, I couldn't do, just like I had to do a Riesling from Ontario, I had to do a Pinot Noir. As I just finished telling you, Pinot Noirs are, do really well with cool climate. Pinot Noir kind of grows well in a lot of places, but as soon as you get to a place where there's too much heat, so I think Southern California, it's too much for this delicate grape. They call this the heartbreak grape for a reason. It has got very thin skin, so you know how thin-skinned people tend to be very sensitive. This grape is very sensitive. There's a really great movie, if you haven't seen it, now that everybody's kind of on lockdown, I'm sure that you're looking for things to watch. If you haven't watched it in a while, maybe take a re-look at it, and it's called Sideways with Paul Giamatti. It is all wine lovers, winemakers love that movie. It is funny, it is sad. Two guys in a road trip through wine country, but he does this really long, beautiful, almost a soliloquy about his love for Pinot Noir. It's iconic. You could probably look it up on YouTube and just look up for like Paul Giamatti Pinot Noir and you'll find the video. It's so good, but it's his ode to it. So the only thing I'll take away from that movie though is do not knock Merlot like he does, because it's a big no-no. There's this actual sale of Merlot went down after that movie all over North America because of that. But I just finished doing a class with Merlot for the next tasting kit. And I was just taping the video of it, and that the Merlot that I feature in that class is so good. So do not knock Merlot. It's still used primarily in Bordeaux blends. So if the Bordeaux are still making it, Bordelais are still making that, then you can start drinking Merlot. Okay, back to Pinot Noir. So let's look at the color first, because this is really good indication of Pinot Noir. This is where you can actually start looking for Pinot Noir based on what it looks like in the glass. So definitely much clearer. It's a light red, but don't let that fool you. There's always flavor in this. Now you're going to see that meniscus a little bit more now that it's a darker color of wine, right? So it's almost like this tawny gold tinge to it, and then it turns to clear. For red wines, it's the opposite compared to white wines. That meniscus is going to get bigger as the wine ages, and then the wine gets to be lighter in color and more of that tawny golden tone to it. And that's just how red wines age. So we're going to do 2 sniffs. So first one, nose in. This is where you're going to get those darker fruit, still red fruit, similar to what you had, because remember there's a lot of Pinot Noir in this rosé, right? But this is going to be its purest form. Just different winemaker, but definitely red fruit. All right, put some oxygen in there. He also knows how it's clinging to the glass. As much as it's a light colored red wine, you can see how much flavor is going to be in this, and there's still alcohol in it. So good. 2 sips. This is a great example of a juicy Pinot Noir that has enough tannins that it'll be able to cut through a lot of different foods and meats and things like that. Salami, deli meats, those tapa style meats, that kind of thing is really good with this. It can handle things that are salty because there's enough fruit flavor in this. Nothing crazy, but you can add some saltiness stuff to it. And it cuts through the acidity, and those tannins really do well with fatty things. So rich fatty cheeses, things that are schmearable are really great with this. I always try to remember the people that when, as much as you may think brie would go best with white wines or something light, Pinot Noir is one of my favorite pairings for brie, partly because of just the acidity levels in it and balances it out. But also a lot of people put things like berry compote toppings and things like that on their brie, either for appetizers or almost desserts. So don't knock, or on a cheese board, they always put fresh fruits and stuff with it. So just think, you're actually just pairing this with that same cheese. So if you're already tasting those same fruit flavors, like raspberries and touch of blackberry, red plums, but definitely berries is the number one thing that kind of pops out in this. But then, so berries and brie, it works, right? All right, taking the second sip. Gosh, I love Pinot Noir. This is a very Burgundian style. So this is the way the French would make it in Central France. It's still got a darkness to it. It's got a dark finish to it. Like as I'm swallowing, I'm almost getting this, not quite of the burnt, like if you grilled fruit. So if you took some plums and you put them on the barbecue and got that grilled marks to it, that's what I'm getting. So there's like a little bit of a dark spice to it, which is really lovely. This can also handle, again, just like the brie, it'll handle that fontina that's there if there's any left. And then you can get into the Gruyere. Gruyere's got a lot of flavor to it, but it's not overly salty. So it still has a bit of a funkiness to it. So it can handle some funk from a wine like this too. So as I mentioned, this is a cool climate grape, does really well. There are other Pinot Noirs, depending on what the winemaker intended, depending on how hot the season was. You can get some that are much richer, darker in color, darker in flavor, and more pronounced, almost jammy-like. So those would be closer to your California style Pinots in those warmer climates. The more tannins in a Pinot Noir, so the more that you feel it here, we tell people they can feel it here in their mouth and it's drying, the more fattiness you can handle with it. So that's told you the richer the cheeses, things like those spreadable creamy type bries or soft camemberts. Then you can go into think fatty meats. So anything that's got like duck is always phenomenal with Pinot Noirs. If you're a vegetarian, going into juicy mushrooms because the earthiness is really pronounced in Pinot Noir. So I always try to think of yeah, so if you think about like duck and mushrooms, a lot of French style cuisines that use a lot of fat and butter and richness and pastries and stuff like that, I always try to say that Pinot Noir is that classic French style that can pretty much go with a lot of different things. And then on your barbecue, it's the same idea, but yes, it's the grill marks, so you can handle a little bit more spice. So think of the flavors in this wine. And if you were going to make a grilled platter of meats and vegetables and things like that, then you can pick anything that you would say, okay, well, I can also have grilled fruit with this, like a roast pork or pork kebabs. And yes, chicken would good too, but you can actually handle some more spice with this because the fruitiness in this will sort of balance out the spice to it. So it's a really great barbecue wine, in my opinion. And I also happen to really enjoy this with ribs. So I like a dry rub on my ribs, but like tear apart, eat with my fingers, select back some Pinot Noir with it. You're gonna try it this weekend, I know you will. Okay. For those of you who are watching this live, if you had any questions about any of these wines, feel free to put it in the chat box and I will answer it afterwards. If you are watching this with the YouTube video, feel free to also put questions in the comment section and I can always, I get notifications when somebody comments on the YouTube video and then I can answer them for you there as well. So if I can lend any more support to the local wine industry, I will. So this last one is the Big Red. And I chose this one for two reasons. One, people don't always know this. So Trius, so this is the classic bottle. I guess is one of the first bottles styles that they made. It is a nod to the very first vintage 25 years ago. People don't know that this Trius Red was once named the best red wine in the world. Right? And it came here from Ontario. And it was the first time that Ontario wineries were kind of like, okay, so they do more than just a Riesling and a sparkling, they can do other things. So it was just a matter of showing that we have the soils, we have the space, we have the knowledge and the know-how, and it's just, we haven't been doing it as long as some of the other countries and areas have been. Just gotta give us some time. But yes, so you're having this is this 25th anniversary commemorative bottle. But yes, this is a nod to the original vintage 25 years ago. It's not 25 years old, unfortunately. Yeah, if you could ever find one, that's great. This is done in a Bordeaux style. So I was talking about Merlot. Merlot's not in this particular blend. Yes, using a little bit, but it is Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot plus Cabernet Franc, which is the other big one. And they are the those are three of the big ones for Bordeaux production. And the magic of the blend and the percentage that is used. I don't think they give me the actual percentage. I think I even looked on their website to check and see if they actually, yeah, they didn't say the percentages of them. Maybe it's giving them some leeway depending on what the blend's going to be every year. But the whole idea of doing these Bordeaux style blends, and a lot of wineries throughout Ontario are doing that as well, is that they may have a really great crop of Cabernet Sauvignon that came out great this year, but it might not be their only red grape. And they think, okay, well, I want to start playing around with different ones. And this way they can take the best of one kind, the best of another, and then maybe this batch did better here. And then this one may be a little tart this year because of the cool temperatures or something. So I need something with a higher natural sugar content in it, like Merlot or something, to kind of balance it out a little bit. So that's the whole idea of blends. So let's do exactly the same thing. White. So this is a little darker in color. I can already see that there's, it's clinging to the glass a little more. So, you know, it's going to be a little bit richer, a little more alcohol in this one, but definitely a little bit darker in color, deeper in color, a little less see-through, a little more weight to this one compared to that Pinot Noir, which normally it is. This is closer to looking like a Cab Sauv, actually. I'm going to say that there's Cabernet Sauvignon is probably the, I'm guessing, but this looks like a Cab. Okay, so we're going to do 2 sniffs. You're already getting black fruit. That's number 1. Definitely some smokiness. Touch of spice. Not quite leathery, but it's like you can smell age on wine, right? But definitely when I say black fruit, so it's like blackberry, black plums, right? That's kind of black currant. It just smells dark is the first word. So, I mean, it kind of gives a nod to the dark bottle, right? It just gives me that darkness. Okay, so 2 sips. That's definitely a Bordeaux style. Now, I think I would, depending on your palate and how many Bordeaux you consume, I'm going to take a guess that there's more Cabernet in this than Merlot. Cabernet Sauvignon, I meant, not Cabernet Franc. I think that the dark smokiness that comes from the Cab Franc, that also gives a lot of the tannin and the structure to it. But the Cabernet Sauvignon is that's the fruit, those red fruits that are coming up. Merlot is giving a little bit of balance to the sweetness. I told you the fruitiness of it a little bit, but Cabernet Sauvignon, I don't want to do an entire Bordeaux class with you, but there are 2 areas of Bordeaux, and there's a right bank and a left bank. And one side is heavier on Cabernet Sauvignon, the blends, and the other side is heavier on Merlot. That's one of the reasons that I'm kind of like, this is going to be like more of a left bank Bordeaux. But it's easy drinking for a blend. As much as when you first, that's why you should never trust it just based on the aroma or just on the flavor, because it's kind of giving you a little bit of both. Having the sniffs ahead of time allows you to capture that into your senses, remember it. And now when you're taking a sip, your nose is still going in the glass, right? So you're getting the taste and the smell at the same time. And that kind of gives you the full picture of it. So you're actually seeing it, tasting it, smelling it all at the same time. So this is your Sunday dinner wine. This is your steak on the barbecue. This one can handle, because of the tannins in it, you know how it's drying up your mouth a little bit, just makes you mouth water because you want more food. But this can handle like a ribeye steak, right? Because of the fat content in it. Your big roast beef, a slow roast pork with a lot of spice stuff on it. This can handle like a bacon wrapped whatever. They used to have other special names for them. You can tell I don't do them anymore. I think they're called tornadoes or something. My mom used to buy them or make them and stuff all the time. But yeah, like the bacon wrapped beef, the filet type things would go okay with this because that just adds additional fat to the outside, which does well with tannins. Again, grilled mushrooms, grilled eggplant, things that have like those darker flavors will do really well with this wine. But this is, again, this is that Sunday dinner, put a big roast thing, especially if it's rainy tomorrow. You just want to put something in and let it sit. When it comes out, you have you just that and the potatoes and gravy, and this wine can stand up to all of that. So yes, this actually cuts to gravy. But I also would suggest that if you had something for dessert afterwards, there's a little bit of like that dark cocoa. So if you have finished your cheese, um, try to save a little swig and have one of those with those little chocolates that I gave you, because actually a dark chocolate can do with this, and it'll actually make this wine taste a little fruitier. If you had a milk chocolate with this, this would taste very, very dry and tannic. But that again, that's for another chocolate wine pairing class. So if there was any questions, again, go ahead and put them in the chat or comments below. And then I'll do my little soliloquy to local wines and my little soapbox. If I had a soapbox, I'd be standing on it. I get frustrated, and my son Alex, who is our general manager here, agrees with me now that he's worked in the industry with me for a little while, that there is this stigma against Ontario wines, especially for the diners who are maybe always just going to the big chain restaurants, or don't go out for dinner very much, but they go to the LCBO and they see that sometimes those bottles for like $9, $10, and they think, well, they must not be as good as those $20, $30 bottles from California or from Italy. But they don't necessarily know the pricing that goes in behind them, so they tend to miss out on some stuff. And we don't have the opportunity to taste wines here at the LCBOs like they do in the SAQ and then down in the States, which is one of the reasons that places like wine bars, like this one, is more about the education and teaching people how to try new things, try new food and wine pairings, maybe retry a wine that you didn't like or you thought you didn't like, but it's because you didn't have food to go with it or the right food pairings. If you have cheese and snacks in front of you, you may have been thinking, okay, I'm going to experiment a little bit because I'm not there to tell you not to, but by all means, that's the whole idea of this. You may try this red with, with certain cheese, and you're like with the Fontina, you wouldn't taste the Fontina anymore because it's very mild tasting cheese. So by learning to play around with wine and food pairings, you kind of start to develop a better idea of what's going to go with what, and you start to appreciate the wine a little bit more, including the winemaking. So we probably have about 30, I would say 35% of our current wine portfolio is still from Ontario. Once Alex and I get back from our shopping trip, we'll be closer to 40 or 45. But I do have some new shipments that are coming in. As I mentioned, Kin Vineyards from the Ottawa Cartridge area. We just got in a couple of more, so we're getting ready for our upcoming tasting event. We were really hoping to do it in person, but unfortunately, the law and a pandemic is getting in our way again. So we will probably be going into a tasting kit format for that one. But by all means, I've got enough for a lot of people. If there's more people, if you want to spread the word and join in on that one, I think it's in May. I think it's the Monday after Mother's Day, I believe. But it's going to be another fun one. We'll do it in a similar Zoom style like this, so that everyone can kind of sit at home and relax and enjoy themselves. But most of the wines from Kin are ones you cannot get at the LCBO. So I really wanted to showcase everything that this new winery is doing and make you reappreciate what if it can happen in Ottawa, it can happen here. I'm still trying to find farmers up here that want to take the plunge and start growing grapes. So if you know anybody, spread the word. I'm not doing it, but I'm happy to help and cheer them on as much as I can. And then we also have other ones coming in. There's a lot of virtual wineries that are throughout Ontario. So if you are really interested in trying new local wines and you don't live next to a wine bar or close to a wine bar, like here in Sudbury now, just sort of look around online. Follow some wine writers, wine bloggers, especially some who are very prevalent on Twitter, but little things like the Open Local Wine event, which is a hashtag. So if you actually do a search for hashtag Open Local Wine, a lot of the local wineries, not just here in Ontario, but all over the States are actually participating this weekend just to celebrate their winemakers that are close to where they are. So you'll get to see some other ideas of things that are happening. There are virtual winemakers out there, meaning they don't have their own winery, tasting room, everything else, but they're working in cooperation with them to create their own wine labels. So you kind of have to know someone to get them, and we have a few of them here, and we're getting in more all the time, meeting with them when I can, just to because they don't really have a place for people to go and taste them. And then my last thing about tasting wines is that when you do get to go back out to restaurants again, anything that is on a by the glass menu, and that includes the big chain places. So if you go to the Keg or you went to Montana's and there was a wine that looked interesting that's available by the glass, do not hesitate to ask for a sample first. I have never yet had anyone say no to me. And this way you can get an idea okay, especially for something like a rosé. Oh, is it going to be sweeter, fruitier? Is it going to be dry enough with what I was planning to have? By asking for a sample first, they're not wasting it, you're not wasting it, and you're going to be happier. So just don't try to go and do like 10 different samples because I think they will sort of put their foot down. But by all means, they all do it. So just go ahead and ask. When it comes to bottle purchases, that's a whole other thing. It's a little dance, kind of got to know what you're ordering. Or if you're never sure, order a bottle that's also available by the glass. So this way, if you don't like it and you're nervous about it, they'll be less hesitant to refund it to you because if the wine is still good, they'll just use it for their by the glass. So they don't miss out. If there's any other wineries that you can think of that you want to give a shout out, by all means, if they weren't showcased in this particular tasting class, go ahead and tag them. Just say, hey, had a great time. Wish we had more time to be able to taste wines from, and then name your favorite winery. They all deserve a shout out here in Ontario. And as I mentioned, if as soon as we're out of this and you're sitting in the rain in the next little while and you're looking through things online or what are we going to do when this pandemic is over, where would I like to visit in Ontario, start mapping out different areas that you want to explore in a little road trip. One of the trends that's going to be happening in this next 6 to 9 months is more and more people are going to be rediscovering the area that they're in. So whether you're rediscovering your own town or city and the businesses within it, whether you are going on little day trips here and there, day trip to the Collingwood area is fantastic if you're from Sudbury. I always highly recommend it. Yes, you can go and see our friends at Georgian Hills. But they also have a lot of cideries. You can go through Airbnb if you don't want to go and pay Blue Mountain prices. Try to go on off time, so not necessarily Friday or Saturday. And there's another little great wine bar, can't remember the name of it, but it's right on the main street in the downtown Collingwood. You almost have to go in an alleyway to go and find it, but it's not much bigger than this place. And they have a really great selection and a little bottle shop that you can actually grab bottles to go as well. And they also really support local wineries as well, because I was having a little chat with the owners when I was in there and we were oohing and awing at a lot of the new vintages that were coming out. So I would challenge you, if you didn't purchase the bottles from the LCBO this time around, LCBO is still open during our stay-at-home order. So please go and visit and kind of walk by some of the other places just for a change. And maybe just like you're challenging yourself to binge watch a particular show or challenge yourself to, I watched all of the Marvel movies in order. Now that's a pandemic first for me. But if you want to go and do that and give yourself a little challenge, something to do over the next couple of weeks, maybe as a household, you decide we are only going to buy Ontario wines until this is over. And maybe you'll find new favorites, not just the ones that you had today, but there's always new favorites around the corner. And any kind of shout outs that you can show them online, just to give them a bit of a applause and that showing that we are one of the next great places, if not already, for wine production in all of the world, I have to admit. Okay, so I always do, I was gonna say it's bad luck to do this without glass. I always like to do a toast at the end. So please make sure in all of your posts for the rest of this weekend, especially if you're doing a local wine, if you take pictures of anything that you're having today, make sure to use the hashtag open local wine or open local wine. That also just lets the organizers, the ones who started this, the two girls from the Cork Report in the States, letting us know that Ontario wines are alive and thriving, even way up here in Northern Ontario. And also, if you can, always try to post things with a hashtag support local, because that doesn't just nod to wineries, but it talks about the hospitality, tourism businesses, the local restaurants, all your local retailers, your mom and pop shops, all of the local businesses kind of really need the support of the people around them. And so every time that somebody graces my front door or buy something through online from us, we always wanted to say thank you. So grab a glass, if you have anything left in it. Anyways, rate it. And my kudos is always stay safe and stay home. Have some wine. Cheers.